Jake Morrison sat in the cold metal chair and watched the aliens argue. The big chamber on Vorthak Prime stretched out like a football stadium but filled with creatures that looked like nightmares. Bug-like Zeltharians clicked their mandibles, while floating brain things called Mindari pulsed with weird colors. The rock people known as Vorthans just sat there like ancient statues that sometimes moved. This was the 847th meeting of the Galactic Council, and Jake was tired. He had been Earth's ambassador for 12 years now, and every single meeting felt the same. The aliens would talk and talk about rules and laws and trade agreements. Then they would vote on something that hurt humans. Then they would tell Jake that humans were too young to understand real politics. Today they were talking about moving human farms. 3 whole planets where humans grew food would be given to the Zeltharians for some cultural project. Jake looked at the vote counter on his screen. It showed 847 votes for the motion and 1 vote against. The 1 was humanity. Captain Lisa Rodriguez sat next to Jake in her blue military uniform. She was the human military person who came to these meetings. Lisa had short black hair and hard eyes that missed nothing. She leaned over to Jake and whispered, very quietly, "Same story as always, boss. They want our stuff and they vote to take it." Jake nodded but did not speak. Behind them sat Dr. Paul Harris, who took care of all the science things for Earth. Paul was a thin man with glasses who always carried a small computer. Right now he was typing very fast and downloading files. Paul was smart enough to see where this was going. The head of the meeting was Chairman Morthok, a Vorthon who looked like a mountain made of gray stone. Morthok had been alive for thousands of years, and he acted like he knew everything. His voice sounded like rocks falling down. "A hill when he spoke. The motion passes," Morthok announced. "The 3 human agricultural worlds will be transferred to Zeltharian cultural preservation zones within 1 standard year." A Zeltharian named Crixeth stood up on his 6 bug legs. He was tall and thin with big black eyes and wings that buzzed. When he got excited, Crixeth always talked down to humans like they were children. "This is for the good of galactic civilization," Crixeth said in his clicking voice. "Humans are still very young in cosmic terms. Perhaps in another century or 2 they will learn proper respect for superior cultures." Lisa's hand moved to where her weapon would be if she was allowed to carry one in the council chamber. Jake put his hand on her arm to stop her, but he felt the same anger burning in his chest. For 50 years, humans had been part of the galactic community. 50 years of trying to fit in and be good neighbors. 50 years of sharing human knowledge and getting treated like dumb kids in return. Human doctors had saved millions of alien lives. Human engineers had fixed countless broken machines across the galaxy. Human diplomats had stopped wars between alien species. And what did humanity get for all that work? They got their planets taken away and lectures about being too young. Jake stood up slowly. The chamber got quiet as hundreds of alien eyes turned to look at him. Some aliens had 2 eyes and some had 20, but they all stared at the human ambassador. "Ambassador Morrison," Chairman Morthok said with his rock voice, "do you wish to file a formal complaint about this decision?" Jake looked around the massive chamber. He saw the proud Zeltharians who thought they were better than everyone because their technology was advanced. He saw the mysterious Mindari who believed their psychic powers made them wise. He saw the ancient Vorthans who acted like age automatically meant wisdom. None of them respected humans. None of them ever would. "No," Jake said clearly so everyone could hear. "I do not wish to file a complaint." Some aliens made surprised noises. Filing complaints was what losing species always did. It never changed anything, but it made them feel better. "I wish to formally withdraw humanity from this council." "Effective immediately," Jake continued. The chamber went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the far side of the huge room. In 10,000 years of galactic history, no species had ever quit the Council. Species got kicked out sometimes for bad behavior. Species got conquered and absorbed by stronger neighbors. But no one had ever just walked away. Chairman Morthock's stone face showed what might have been surprise. Ambassador Morrison, surely you cannot be serious. The Council provides protection and trade opportunities that primitive species need. Primitive. Jake repeated the word like it tasted bad. You know what, Chairman? We tried to be good galactic citizens. We shared our medicine and saved your people when plagues hit. We shared our engineering and fixed machines that had been broken for centuries. We shared our food and fed populations during famines. Jake's voice got louder as he spoke. We mediated disputes between species that had been fighting for millennia. We provided soldiers for peacekeeping missions. We opened our worlds to refugees when their homes got destroyed. Lisa Rodriguez stood up next to Jake. Then Dr. Paul Harris stood up too. Soon all 20 humans in the delegation were on their feet. And what did we get in return? Jake asked the silent chamber. We got condescension. We got lectures about being young and primitive. We got our votes ignored and our concerns dismissed. We got our planets taken away for your cultural projects. Crixeth buzzed his wings nervously. Surely the humans are not serious about this rash action. You need the Council's protection and guidance. Jake smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. You know what, Crixeth? I think we'll manage just fine on our own. Dr. Paul Harris finished downloading the last of humanity's scientific data from the Council databases. 50 years of human research and discoveries were now safely stored on his personal devices. If the Council wanted to treat humans like children, then the Council could solve their own problems without human help. Lisa, Jake said to Captain Rodriguez, please contact all human personnel throughout Council space. Tell them they have 6 months to return to human territory. We're going home. Lisa nodded and activated her communication device. Across the galaxy, thousands of human doctors and engineers and teachers and advisors would get the message. Humanity was leaving. Jake picked up his formal council credentials and dropped them on the floor. The small metal badge made a tiny ringing sound when it hit the stone. Lisa did the same with her military liaison badge. Dr. Harris dropped his scientific advisor credentials. One by one, every human in the delegation dropped their badges and credentials. The sound of metal hitting stone echoed through the silent chamber like a funeral bell. Good luck with your cultural preservation zones, Jake said to the stunned aliens. I hope they're worth it. The human delegation walked toward the exit. Their footsteps were the only sound in the massive chamber. Behind them, 847 species sat in shocked silence as they realized what had just happened. Humanity had walked away from galactic politics, and the universe would never be the same. 6 months after Jake Morrison walked out of the Galactic Council chamber, the effects of humanity's withdrawal began to show across the galaxy. Captain Lisa Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the military transport ship New Dawn and watched the last group of human engineers pack their belongings on the industrial world of Crex 7. The aliens who worked at the massive factories had gathered to watch the humans leave. Most of them looked confused and worried. For 30 years, these human engineers had kept the ancient Zeltharian machines running smoothly. Now the humans were going home and taking their knowledge with them. Steve Walker was the chief engineer on Crex 7, and he had spent 15 years learning how the old machines worked. The Zeltharian factory managers had treated Steve like he was just a repair worker, even though he was the only person who really understood the complex systems. When machines broke down, the Zeltharians would call Steve to fix them. When production quotas needed to be met, the Zeltharians would ask Steve to optimize the processes. But Steve was never invited to management meetings. His suggestions for improvements were usually ignored. The Zeltharian supervisors took credit for his innovations and acted like humans were just good with simple mechanical work. Now, Steve was loading his tools and personal computers onto the transport ship. Behind him, the factory workers watched, nervously as their most skilled engineer prepared to leave forever. Engineer Walker, called out Zektar, the Zeltharian factory supervisor. His bug-like voice sounded desperate. "Surely you can stay a little longer to train my people on the maintenance procedures?" Steve looked at the supervisor, who had dismissed his ideas for years. "I offered to train your people many times, Zektar. You always said Zeltharians were too advanced to learn from primitive human methods." Zektar's mandibles clicked nervously. "Perhaps we were hasty in that assessment. Your techniques have proven somewhat useful." "Somewhat useful," Steve repeated with a bitter laugh. "These machines have run at 98% efficiency for 15 years because of my work. Before I came, here they barely managed 60%. The Zeltharian supervisor looked uncomfortable. Production reports clearly showed the massive improvements that came after Steve arrived. But admitting that would mean admitting that humans were actually better at something than Zeltharians. Steve picked up his last toolbox and walked toward the transport ship. "Good luck keeping the machines running. I'm sure your advanced Zeltharian engineering will figure it out." Similar scenes played out across the galaxy as human personnel returned home. On the beautiful garden world of Mindari Prime, Dr. Amy Clark packed up her botanical research. For 20 years, she had worked to understand the delicate ecosystem of the Mindari meditation gardens. The psychic aliens considered these gardens sacred and essential for their mental development. The Mindari had tolerated Amy's presence because human botany knowledge helped keep their plants healthy. But they never really listened to her warnings about soil depletion and genetic diversity problems. They assumed their psychic connection to the plants was enough to maintain the gardens forever. Amy had spent decades carefully crossbreeding plant species and developing new soil treatments. Her work had prevented 3 major garden collapses and increased plant yields by 40%. But the Mindari Council had always credited their success to superior psychic gardening techniques. Now Amy was leaving and taking her research with her. The Mindari garden keepers floated around her laboratory as she packed up her equipment. Their brain-like forms pulsed with worried colors. "Dr. Clark," one of them communicated through thought waves, "surely you understand the importance of our sacred gardens. They are crucial for Mindari spiritual development." Amy sealed her last box of soil samples and genetic data. "I understand perfectly. That's why I spent 20 years trying to keep them healthy. But apparently my primitive human science wasn't important enough for you to listen to my recommendations." The Mindari keeper's colors shifted to confused patterns. "Your suggestions were noted and considered, but psychic harmony is more important than chemical analysis. Tell that to your gardens when they start dying," Amy said as she carried her boxes to the waiting transport. Back on Earth, President Helen Torres stood before the combined governments of all human colonies. The massive assembly hall in Geneva held representatives from hundreds of human worlds. Torres was a strong woman with gray hair who had led humanity through difficult times before. "Fellow humans," she began in a clear voice that carried across the hall. "For 50 years, we tried to be good galactic citizens. We shared our knowledge freely. We helped solve problems that had plagued the galaxy for centuries. We offered friendship and cooperation to species across the stars." The hall was completely quiet as every representative listened to their president. "In return, we were treated like children who needed constant supervision. Our votes were ignored, our concerns were dismissed, our planets were taken away for alien cultural projects. We were told repeatedly that we were too young and primitive to have real opinions about galactic affairs." President Torres paused and looked around the assembly. "Well, if we're too primitive to be real partners, then we're too primitive to keep helping them solve their problems. Humanity chooses its own path from now on." The assembly erupted in applause that lasted for several minutes. Human representatives from colony worlds across space stood and cheered. After decades of frustration, they were finally free to govern themselves without alien interference. Commander Ben Foster coordinated the massive evacuation operation from his ship Earth's Pride. Ben was a practical man who specialized in logistics and transportation. Moving thousands of human personnel from hundreds of worlds required careful planning and perfect timing. The operation was massive in scope. Human doctors returned from alien hospitals where they had developed new medical treatments. Human teachers came back from alien schools where they had introduced new educational methods. Human researchers left alien laboratories where they had made breakthrough discoveries. Every returning human brought knowledge and experience back to human space. More importantly, they took their ongoing work with them. Alien civilizations that had benefited from human expertise suddenly found themselves without the people who made their systems work. On the trading hub of Nexus Station, alien merchants started noticing problems with shipping schedules. For decades, humans had managed the complex logistics of moving goods between different star systems. Human coordinators had solved scheduling conflicts and optimized cargo routes. Human inspectors had prevented shipping errors and customs problems. Now, the humans were gone, and the carefully organized trade network began to fall apart. Ships arrived at the wrong times. Cargo got sent to the wrong destinations. Quality control systems failed without human oversight. The alien station managers tried to handle the problems themselves, but quickly became overwhelmed. Different species had different approaches to organization and communication. Without human mediators to bridge the gaps, simple misunderstandings turned into major disputes. Back in human space, borders closed to alien vessels except for limited trade on human terms. Any alien ship that wanted to enter human territory had to follow strict new rules. Payment was required in advance. No credit was extended to council members. No special treatment was given to former alien colleagues. President Torres addressed the human worlds again as reports came in from across the galaxy. The aliens are starting to realize what they lost when they dismissed us as primitive. Their machines are breaking down without human engineers. Their trade networks are collapsing without human coordinators. Their research projects are stalling without human scientists. She smiled as she looked at the reports on her desk. They thought we needed them more than they needed us. They're about to learn how wrong they were. Across human space, colonies activated old defensive protocols and began focusing on human priorities for the first time in decades. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when humanity stopped trying to be helpful neighbors and started taking care of themselves first. 1 year after humanity walked away from galactic politics, the galaxy faced its worst crisis in 1,000 years. The ancient enemy had returned from the dark space between galaxies. They were called the Devourers, and they were creatures of pure energy that fed on advanced technology and civilized worlds. Admiral Carl Peterson stood on the bridge of the human battleship Terra's Shield and watched the emergency broadcasts from across the galaxy. The Devourers had appeared at the rim of the galaxy like a plague of hungry ghosts. Wherever they went, entire star systems went dark as they consumed all the technology and energy they could find. Carl was a veteran military officer with 30 years of experience fighting pirates and hostile aliens. He had been part of the Joint Council task forces that dealt with Devourer incursions in the past. Back then, human tactical creativity had been crucial for containing these cosmic threats. Human officers were good at thinking outside the box and coming up with unexpected solutions. But now, humanity was no longer part of the Galactic Defense Network. The aliens would have to handle this crisis on their own. The Galactic Council had called an emergency session to coordinate their response. Chairman Morthok's voice boomed across subspace communications as he tried to organize the panicked alien fleets. The ancient Vorthon had dealt with Devourer attacks before, but always with human assistance. All Council fleets will converge on the Kepler sector, Morthok announced. We will establish a defensive line and prevent further Devourer advancement. Admiral Kethvar of the Zeltharian Navy acknowledged the orders and began moving his ships into position. The Zeltharians had the most advanced technology in the galaxy, with energy shields and quantum weapons that could tear holes in space itself. Their ships were works of art that combined deadly efficiency with elegant design. But the Zeltharian military followed rigid tactical doctrines that had been developed over centuries of fighting conventional enemies. Their battle plans were precise and logical and completely predictable. Against normal opponents, this approach worked perfectly. Against the Devourers, it was useless. The energy beings had no physical form and no fixed patterns of behavior. They moved like living storms across space and consumed technology in ways that defied conventional physics. Fighting them required constant adaptation and creative thinking. The first major battle took place near the industrial world of Vega 7. Admiral Kethvar deployed his fleet in a perfect defensive formation with overlapping fields of fire and coordinated shield matrices. His battle plan was a masterpiece of military engineering that should have stopped any conventional attack. The Devourers ignored conventional tactics completely. They flowed around the Zeltharian formation like water around rocks and attacked from unexpected angles. When the aliens fired their quantum weapons, the energy beings simply absorbed the attacks and grew stronger. The precise Zeltharian battle plan collapsed within hours as ships were drained of power and left floating dead in space. Meanwhile, the Mindari Collective tried to use their psychic abilities against the Devourers. The brain-like aliens had powerful, mental capabilities that could influence the thoughts and emotions of most living creatures. Their psychic warriors were feared across the galaxy for their ability to drive enemies insane or force them to surrender without firing a shot. But the Devourers were not truly alive in any conventional sense. They were pure energy with no minds to influence and no emotions to manipulate. The Mindari psychic attacks passed right through them like trying to hypnotize a hurricane. Worse, the energy beings seemed to drain psychic power just like they drained technology. Several Mindari warriors collapsed from mental exhaustion after attempting to make contact with the creatures. Back on Zelth Prime, the insectoid leader Crixith found himself facing a situation he had never imagined. His advanced civilization was losing badly to an enemy that ignored all the rules of warfare. Desperate times called for desperate measures. Crixith swallowed his considerable pride and authorized a communication to human space. The message was carefully worded to avoid admitting weakness while still asking for help. The Galactic Council recognizes that the current crisis affects all civilized species, the message stated. We invite humanity to participate in joint, defensive operations for the greater good of the galaxy. The response came back within hours through official diplomatic channels. It was brief and devastating in its simplicity. The Terran Federation appreciates the Council's communication. As you are not currently allied with humanity, please direct all military concerns to the Galactic Council. Have a nice day. Karikath stared at the message in disbelief. The humans were actually refusing to help during a galaxy-wide emergency. Did they not understand the magnitude of the threat? The Devourers would eventually reach human space too if they were not stopped. But Admiral Carl Peterson understood the threat perfectly well. From his position on the human border, he watched the Council fleets fall back in disorder as the Devourers continued their advance. Human military analysts studied the alien battle reports and quickly identified the problems with their tactics. The Zeltharians are fighting them like a conventional enemy, reported Colonel Janet Mills, Carl's chief of staff. They keep trying to establish defensive lines and fix positions, but you can't build walls to stop creatures made of energy. Dr. Elizabeth Cole was working frantically in her laboratory on Luna Station, humanity's most advanced research facility. Elizabeth was a brilliant scientist who specialized in exotic energy phenomena. She had been studying devourer behavior for years and had developed several promising countermeasures. Her latest breakthrough involved using controlled electromagnetic pulses to disrupt the energy patterns that held devourer entities together. The technique required precise timing and careful coordination, but it could potentially scatter the creatures back into harmless cosmic radiation. Elizabeth's research could save the galaxy, but the aliens had made their feelings about human science very clear. They had dismissed human contributions as crude and primitive for decades. If they wanted to solve this crisis using their own superior methods, then Elizabeth was happy to let them try. The Devourer advance continued relentlessly as alien defenses crumbled. Refugee ships fled toward the galactic core carrying survivors from consumed worlds. Some of these ships tried to enter human space seeking sanctuary but were turned away at the borders. "We are not currently accepting refugees from Council space," human border guards informed the desperate aliens. "Please contact the Galactic Council for assistance with your humanitarian crisis." The irony was bitter for the alien refugees. Many of them had voted to take human agricultural worlds just 1 year earlier. Now they were homeless themselves, and the humans were following Council protocols to the letter. Dr. Paul Harris, the former Council science advisor, worked in his new laboratory on Earth and monitored the deteriorating situation. Paul had access to decades of research on devourer behavior, including data that was no longer available to the Council. When humanity withdrew, they had taken all their scientific contributions with them. The Council is making the same mistakes they made 300 years ago, Paul told his research team. They're treating this like a military problem instead of a scientific one. The Devourers can't be defeated by superior firepower. They have to be understood first. But understanding required the kind of creative thinking and willingness to challenge assumptions that humans were known for. The rigid alien hierarchies that had dismissed human input for decades were now paying the price for their arrogance. President Helen Torres received daily reports on the galactic crisis from her intelligence services. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and it was only a matter of time before the Devourers reached human territory. But Torres was determined to make the aliens ask properly for help instead of just assuming humanity would automatically join the fight. "They spent 50 years telling us we were too primitive to have opinions about galactic affairs," Torres told her advisors. "Now they can handle galactic affairs without us." 2 years after humanity walked away from galactic politics, the galaxy was falling apart. The Devourer War had consumed 3 major spiral arms and showed no signs of stopping. But the energy creatures were only part of the problem. Without human mediators and diplomats, old hatreds between alien species had erupted into open warfare. Captain Tony Martinez patrolled the human border in the destroyer New Horizon and watched refugee ships flee from the chaos. Tony was a calm man who had served in the human navy for 20 years. He had seen plenty of conflicts, but nothing like the complete breakdown happening across the galaxy. The Zeltharian hegemony was fighting a civil war with their former colonies. Without human trade coordinators to manage their economy, the Zeltharians had imposed harsh new taxes on colonial worlds. The colonies rebelled, and the situation exploded into violence. Zeltharian fleets bombarded their own people while colonial militias struck back with guerrilla attacks. The Mindari Collective had split into competing factions that fought each other with psychic warfare. Their unity had always been fragile and required careful diplomatic balance to maintain. Human ambassadors had helped mediate disputes between different Mindari groups for decades. Without that stabilizing influence, the psychic aliens turned on each other in a devastating mental conflict that left entire worlds empty of intelligent thought. Even the ancient Vorthons were struggling with internal problems. Their confederation of stone worlds had always been held together by tradition and mutual respect. But economic pressures from the ongoing wars had forced them to make difficult choices about resource allocation. Without human economists to analyze their options, the Vorthons made several disastrous decisions that led to food shortages and civil unrest. Tony's communications officer reported an incoming priority transmission on diplomatic channels. The young officer looked surprised as she identified the sender. "Captain, we're receiving a direct communication from Vorthan Prime. It's Chairman Morthok himself requesting to speak with you." Tony had never spoken directly with the leader of the Galactic Council before. During his time as a military liaison to Council operations, he had always worked through intermediaries and lower-level officials. The fact that Morthok was contacting a human ship captain personally showed how desperate the situation had become. The main screen flickered and showed the massive stone form of Chairman Morthok. The ancient Vorthan looked tired in a way that rocks should not be able to look tired. His usually commanding presence seemed diminished by the weight of galactic crisis. "Captain Martinez," Morthok began with his gravelly voice, "I am addressing you as an official representative of the Terran Federation. The Galactic Council formally requests immediate human assistance in resolving the current crisis." Tony kept his expression neutral, even though he felt a surge of satisfaction. The proud alien who had dismissed humanity as too young and primitive was now begging for help from a human ship captain. "Chairman Morthok," Tony replied politely, "I'm honored by your communication, but I should clarify something. I'm not a diplomat or an ambassador. I'm just a ship captain protecting human space. According to our records, humanity was deemed too young and crude to participate in galactic governance." The chairman's massive form shifted uncomfortably. Even through the communication screen, Tony could see that the ancient leader was struggling with the situation. "Captain Martinez, we may have been hasty in some of our previous assessments regarding human capabilities," Morthok admitted slowly. "The current crisis has revealed certain gaps in our collective knowledge and experience." Tony almost smiled at the careful diplomatic language. The chairman was trying to ask for help without actually admitting that the council had been wrong. "About humanity. What specific assistance is the council requesting?" Tony asked. "We need human tactical expertise to combat the Devourer threat. We need human diplomatic mediation to resolve conflicts between member species. We need human scientific knowledge to develop effective countermeasures. We need human logistical coordination to manage refugee populations and supply lines." The list went on and on. Essentially, the council needed humans to solve every major problem facing the galaxy. Tony let the chairman finish his long recitation before responding. "That's quite a comprehensive list, Chairman. But I'm curious about something. If humans are too young and primitive to be trusted with galactic governance, how can we possibly help with such complex problems?" Morthok's silence stretched for several long moments. The ancient Vorthan was clearly struggling with the contradiction in his position. Meanwhile, on Earth, President Helen Torres convened an emergency session of the Terran Senate. The massive chamber in Geneva was packed with representatives from human colonies across space. Everyone knew that a critical decision was approaching. Dr. Sandra White, the Secretary of Xenological Affairs, presented her analysis of the galactic situation. Sandra was a sharp woman who had spent years studying alien cultures and politics. Her report painted a grim picture of civilizational collapse. "The galactic economy has contracted by 70%, Sandra reported. 23 species are engaged in active warfare with each other. The Devourer incursion has claimed 68 star systems and continues advancing toward the galactic core. Refugee populations exceed 200 billion beings, with nowhere safe to go." The numbers were staggering. Sandra's presentation included holographic displays showing the spread of conflict and chaos across the galaxy. Red zones marked areas of active warfare, while black zones showed systems consumed by the Devourers. "The council species are desperate," Sandra continued. "They're offering trade concessions, territorial grants, and technology transfers in exchange for human assistance. Some are even offering formal apologies for past treatment of humanity." Senator Kevin Brown stood to address the chamber. Kevin was a veteran politician who had served in the Senate for 15 years. He had witnessed humanity's frustration with alien condescension firsthand. "For 50 years, we bent over backwards to prove we belonged at their table," Kevin said in a strong voice that carried across the chamber. "We shared our knowledge freely. We solved their problems. We mediated their disputes. We kept their machines running and their economies functioning." The chamber was completely quiet as every representative listened to Kevin's words. "And what did we get in return?" Kevin continued. We got lectures about being too young. We got dismissed as primitive. We got our planets taken away for their cultural projects. They made it very clear that we were junior partners who should be grateful for their guidance. Kevin paused and looked around the chamber before delivering his conclusion. Maybe it's time they proved they belong at our table instead. The chamber erupted in applause that lasted several minutes. Human representatives who had endured decades of alien condescension finally felt vindicated by events. Back in space, Captain Tony Martinez was still in communication with Chairman Morthok when his sensor officer reported multiple alien fleets approaching the human border. The ships belonged to different council species, and they were all broadcasting distress signals. Captain, his communications officer reported, we're receiving hundreds of requests for emergency sanctuary. They're saying their home systems are under attack, and they have nowhere else to go. Tony looked at the alien fleets on his tactical display. Many of these ships belonged to species that had voted to take human agricultural worlds just 2 years earlier. Now they were homeless refugees seeking help from the humans they had dismissed as primitive. Chairman Morthok, Tony said to the stone alien on his screen, your people are asking us to solve problems that your council created through poor leadership and arrogant decision-making. The question is no longer whether we can help. The question is whether we should help. Chairman Morthok's ancient features showed something that might have been desperation. For the first time in thousands of years, the proud leader of Galactic civilization was forced to admit that his people needed help from beings they had considered inferior. Captain Martinez, Morthok said quietly, what would humanity require in exchange for assistance? Tony smiled for the first time during the conversation. The negotiations were about to begin, and this time, humanity would be setting the terms. 3 years after walking away from galactic politics, humanity finally responded to the galaxy's desperate pleas, but their answer surprised everyone. Instead of rejoining the failing Galactic Council, President Helen Torres announced something completely new. Humanity was forming the Terran Cooperative, a revolutionary organization based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. The announcement came during a global broadcast from Geneva that reached every human world and was transmitted to alien governments across the galaxy. President Torres stood at the podium in the World Assembly Hall and addressed not just humanity, but the entire galactic community. For 3 years we have watched the galaxy tear itself apart, Torres said in a clear voice that carried across space. We have seen wars break out between former allies. We have watched the Devourer crisis consume entire star systems. We have observed the complete breakdown of interstellar cooperation and trade. The president paused as her words were translated into hundreds of alien languages and broadcast to refugee fleets, embattled worlds, and desperate governments. The old Galactic Council was built on the idea that some species were naturally superior to others. That age meant wisdom. That advanced technology meant better judgment. That ancient cultures deserved automatic respect while younger civilizations should remain silent and grateful. Torres looked directly into the camera that would carry her words to alien leaders across the galaxy. The Terran Cooperative operates on a different principle. We believe that good ideas can come from anyone, that every species has something valuable to contribute, that mutual respect and genuine partnership create better solutions than hierarchy and condescension. The terms of the cooperative were simple but revolutionary. Any species could join regardless of their age, technology level, or past conflicts, but membership required contributing something unique and valuable to the collective good. There would be no senior or junior partners, no species-based hierarchies, and no dismissal of ideas based on who suggested them. Jake Morrison, the former ambassador who had walked out of the council chamber 3 years earlier, was appointed as the first Secretary General of the Terran Cooperative. Jake stood before a gathering of representatives from dozens of species in the newly constructed cooperative headquarters on Luna Station. The old council failed Because it was built on fear and tradition, Jake explained to the assembled delegates. Fear that younger species would challenge established power. Tradition that said age automatically meant wisdom. The cooperative succeeds because it embraces change and values results over reputation. The first major test of the cooperative came immediately with the ongoing devourer crisis. Instead of treating it as purely a military problem, the cooperative assembled mixed teams of scientists from different species to study the energy beings and develop comprehensive countermeasures. Dr. Amy Chen led the primary research team on Luna Station. Amy was a brilliant scientist who specialized in exotic physics and had been studying devourer behavior since the crisis began. Her team included human researchers, Mindari psychic specialists, and Vorthan historical scholars who remembered previous devourer incursions. The key insight came when we stopped trying to fight them and started trying to understand them, Amy explained to the cooperative leadership. The devourers aren't just mindless destroyers, they're actually fleeing from something even worse in the dark space between galaxies. This revelation changed everything. Instead of viewing the devourers as an enemy to be destroyed, the cooperative teams developed a symbiotic approach. Human engineering combined with Mindari psychic techniques and Vorthan ancient knowledge to create communication protocols that could actually talk to the energy beings. Admiral Lisa Rodriguez commanded the joint cooperative fleet that made first contact with a devourer swarm near the Centaurus Arm. Lisa had been promoted to lead the new multi-species naval force after proving that integrated crews worked better than segregated fleets. Devourer entities. This is Admiral Rodriguez of the Terran Cooperative. Lisa broadcast on the new communication frequencies. We request peaceful contact to discuss mutual concerns. The response came as patterns of energy that the Mindari psychics translated into concepts and emotions, fear, desperation, and an overwhelming need to escape from something terrible pursuing them from outside the galaxy. The breakthrough came when Dr. Paul Harris, working with Vorthan archaeologists, discovered references to the true threat in ancient records. The devourers were refugees fleeing from cosmic predators called the Void Hunters that consumed entire galaxies. The energy beings had been running for millions of years, feeding on technology to maintain their strength for the endless flight. Instead of destroying the devourers, the cooperative offered them a deal: safe haven in specially constructed energy reservations in exchange for their help in detecting and preventing future Void Hunter incursions. The devourer energy signatures could serve as an early warning system for cosmic threats that threatened all galactic life. The agreement was signed in a ceremony that would have been impossible under the old council system. Human diplomats worked alongside devourer energy patterns, Mindari psychics, and Vorthan historians to create the first interspecies treaty that included non-biological entities. Meanwhile, the old Galactic Council continued to decline as more species abandoned it to join the cooperative. The Zeltharian hegemony split apart as their colonial worlds declared independence and applied for cooperative membership. The Mindari collective reunified under cooperative mediation programs that used human psychological techniques to heal their psychic conflicts. Crixth, the arrogant Zeltharian who had dismissed humanity as too primitive, found himself reduced to managing a minor administrative office on a backwater world. His once mighty hegemony had crumbled as their rigid hierarchies proved unable to adapt to changing circumstances. How did this happen? Crixth asked his few remaining subordinates as he watched another batch of Zeltharian worlds apply to join the cooperative. We had superior technology and ancient wisdom. We should have been leading the galaxy, not begging for membership in a human organization. The answer was obvious to everyone except Crixth himself. The cooperative succeeded because it valued contribution over credentials, results over reputation, and innovation over tradition. 5 years after humanity walked away from galactic politics, Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of Cooperative Central, the massive space station, That served as headquarters for the new galactic organization. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see ships from hundreds of species working together on joint projects. A human cargo vessel docked alongside a Mindari meditation ship that was delivering psychic healing specialists to war-torn worlds. A Vorthan deep space explorer shared docking space with a converted devourer energy collector that was mapping cosmic radiation patterns. Former enemies worked side by side because they had chosen cooperation over conflict. Commander Sarah Mitchell, Jake's aide and a veteran of the human withdrawal, joined him at the observation window. Sarah had been there when humanity walked out of the council chamber, and she had watched the galaxy tear itself apart before finally learning to work together. "Think they've learned their lesson?" Sarah asked, as she watched a group of mixed-species engineers solving a complex technical problem together. Jake smiled as he remembered the condescending lectures about human primitiveness that had driven humanity away from galactic politics. About not taking humanity for granted? Oh, I think that lesson has been thoroughly absorbed. In the distance, the old council worlds struggled with their growing irrelevance as the cooperative attracted more members and handled more of the galaxy's important business. The ancient hierarchies that had once ruled space now found themselves sidelined by an organization that valued merit over birthright. The cooperative's success came from a simple but revolutionary idea. Instead of assuming that some species were naturally better than others, they created a system where anyone could contribute and everyone's ideas were evaluated based on their actual worth rather than the credentials of whoever suggested them. Humanity had walked away from galactic politics when they were treated as junior partners. They returned as leaders of a new kind of galactic community built on the radical principle that good ideas could come from anywhere and that mutual respect created better solutions than ancient prejudices. The universe had panicked when humanity withdrew. Now it was learning to thrive under humanity's guidance.